This is the CFF Site's Preseason Preview Series, show number 2. We're talking running backs. Mike, we just came off of talking about the quarterbacks when we did our show last week. A lot of good stuff, new faces, new places, or familiar faces, new places. We kind of did some players that we really like, talked about maybe some quarterback battles. We're going to go ahead and do the same rundown, very similar format, but it brings a lot of different teams into focus because there's a lot of schools where there's maybe clarity at quarterback, but there's some uncertainty or maybe possibly timeshare running back by committee on the horizon. And, you and I talked before we started hitting the record button of, you want to nail the quarterback. It's the one position, I mean, the running back. It's the one position that a lot of people put a lot of stock in at the beginning of the year. So you really want to nail that position in a draft. But yet, look, injuries happen, uncertainty at times. What is your philosophy on running backs early? Because it seems like, a lot of people do put a lot of stock in whether they go running back with 1, 2, or maybe take 2 running backs with their top 3 picks. It seems to be the one position that there's a heavy investment in drafts, at least getting running backs early and build them, making them part of the foundational part of your roster, right?
Yeah, you see that across almost every single CFF draft that you're going to do this off season. We'll see if it changes, as we get more news or what have you in August. But yeah, you're seeing running backs flying off the board in the first 2 rounds. And I think people are just chasing after those sure things. But it's interesting because, and we had this pre-show, like how many of these running backs are sure things this year? And you can go question marks from RB1 on down through the top 10, and we'll get into some of these. I think the difficult part with this season is that at some of those schools that you're so used to having the proven commodities at running back are those schools that typically produce those, the high end running backs. Boise State, we got question marks. Oregon, debatable, but there are some question marks with Oregon, like Michigan, who's going to be the RB1 there. Texas, there's a lot of uncertainty with Texas in that backfield to some. So I think part of the dilemma this year is that these schools that are typically producing top 5, top 10 fantasy running backs, there's question marks in those backfields.
Yeah, we'll transition right into that since you brought it up. Let's talk about some familiar faces in new places, and we'll start right there at our Oregon, right? Mekhi Hughes comes over from Tulane, proven workhorse, put up big numbers in that Tulane offense. You would figure Oregon, led by offensive coordinator Will Stein, is going to be, I wouldn't say they're going to be as good as they are last year. We've got a new quarterback with Dante Moore. We spoke about him in the quarterback show. They lost Evan Stewart, so they'll have to replace him. Even though a school like Oregon, you probably think there's no shortage of receiver talent there. But, does Hughes step into that running back 1 role with Noah Whittingham still there? Whittington. What's your thought on Mekhi Hughes? Because I'll tell you, man, as far as him being a workhorse over at Tulane, I can see that translating here at Oregon. And you and I spoke about it. I might have been a little higher on Dante Moore when we recorded the show, or maybe in draft. So I think Oregon's offense is going to be okay. But because we don't have Dylan Gabriel back, and because we have a new quarterback there in Dante Moore, maybe there will be a tendency to lean on that running game a little bit more with Hughes. I really like him this year.
Yeah, I think he's got a really high floor. Just because of, Will Stein in that system, as you were talking about, like the last 3 years between Jordan James and Marquise Irving, you're getting, a top 40 running back in all 3 seasons. All 3 of them averaged over 17 fantasy points per game. Um, the debate with Hughes is the quote unquote upside, right? And is he worth that first round draft pick? Because not all the talk, but a lot of the talk this offseason was just, both the position coach mentioned it. I think probably the head coach as well, just how much depth they
Yeah.
have in the backfield, right? No Whittington, like you
Yeah.
mentioned, Jay Harris, Jaden Lamar, like these guys were really talked up during the offseason. So how much, we've typically seen a bell cow running back
Yeah.
per se in that system. Is that going to continue this season? Probably, right? But there's are those question marks of like with they're keep on touting this depth in the Oregon backfield. So maybe they split it up a little bit more this year.
Yeah, it's a great debate now. Things have changed over the last 2 or 3 years with NIL, right? Like I think 2 years ago we would have been, the talk would have been they don't go out and get Hughes. Hughes doesn't leave Tulane where he's going to get 200 plus carries every year unless he's going to be the starter. And nowadays with NIL money, you never know if a player's just moving for the money. Because to your point, is it for depth or is it to bring him in as a starter? I lean on the side to bring him in as a starter just because of his proven durability and bell cow ability. But look, it's a different day. Compared to 2 years ago, it's different than it is today, right?
Yeah, and I asked this. I was like, because I don't remember offhand, but I was like, man, when was that quote from that running backs coach who was just talking up his depth? Because like if that's happening during spring camp, like he's probably just saying that to keep all of his
Keep him
guys in
around.
house, right? Yeah, hey,
Yeah,
we're
try
gonna
to keep them
distribute
happy. I
carries.
mean, that's
Yeah.
that's the thing now. They're fighting attrition. That's why
Yep.
you're seeing some of these schools go away from a spring game.
Yeah, so I think Hughes is a very high floor candidate, right? We like the Oregon offense. It's been consistent over the last few years. He's most likely going to lead
Yeah.
that room in rushing attempts. So it's just 230 attempts that he was getting at Tulane. I don't think that's going to happen necessarily this year.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll see. I don't think he'll get the volume like you said, but the scoring potential could be there to offset some of the carries that he doesn't get. Now, let's transition to another player that moving up from a G5 school to P4, and that's Ahmad Hardy, who was a workhorse at Louisiana Monroe last year. He goes to Missouri. Missouri loves to have a bell cow back. Again, another player that has proven it, seems dependable, durable, 200 plus, I believe, carries last year at Louisiana Monroe. We have Hardy, a top 10 pick. I have him at 10 going into the preseason. I'm not sure exactly where you have him. I really like him this year. I like the offense at Missouri. They particularly like to identify a lead back and ride them if they have them. I think that could be really good for Hardy this year. And again, I think Missouri's schedule shapes up pretty nice where it's not too daunting. So I do think the fantasy potential is there and the appeal is there for a player like Hardy.
Yeah, I agree. I have him right at 10. Um, I found this stat while doing the preseason guide. He forced the second most missed tackles in the entire country last season, right behind Ashton Genty. So I think that's not end all be all, but that's a telling sign that this
Yeah.
guy is legitimate talent, right? And I think the biggest question mark for Hardy with some people's hesitation is that okay, he's moving up from the Sun Belt now to the SEC, and can his talent translate to another level? And the thing with Missouri is we've seen that already, right? In recent memory, just a couple of years ago with Cody Schrader, and he was coming
Hmm.
at a
Yep.
level lower than the Sun Belt from Division two, whatever.
Hmm.
So we've seen that already, that transition work out for Missouri. So I'm pretty confident that Hardy can at least replicate, a good portion of what someone like Cody Schrader did a couple years ago. I don't really see a challenger necessarily in that backfield, which I think helps. People like the incoming freshman that's coming in, Marquise Davis, I believe his name is. But assuming a freshman's going to really challenge a proven rusher like Hardy might be a little far-fetched.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's why I think that's probably we're both on Hardy he comes in and he just feels like safe, secure, starting the season, getting the first snap in that backfield. Now, as I talk about familiar faces and new places, I don't want to go too far down the list, but as we stay inside the top 30-ish players or so, Mike, there's two more we could touch on real quick. Bangura back at Ohio, right? After he did things really well 2 years ago there, went off to Minnesota for a season, didn't really get much work there. Back at Ohio now, back in the MAC. Uh, Parker Navarro is going to be the quarterback. You figure it's going to be a nice 1-2 punch on the ground at Ohio. We're back on Bangura this year, right? I really like him this year. I don't have him too high, but I have him somewhere, I think, right around the top 20-ish pick or so. How are you on feeling with Bangura?
Yeah, I agree. Like I'm not going to have him top 10 necessarily, but right in that 11 to
Yeah.
16 range. I don't have up
I
exactly
have
where I have
15. I
him.
have him at 15, so I just checked real quick. Yeah, so I got him kind of right outside the top 10, safely inside the top 20.
Yeah, and he's going safely in that third round pretty much every single draft. And I just think that feels safe. I mean, we've already seen him do it in the MAC, and now he's had a year off essentially to not heal up, but stay healthy and or
Sure.
freshen up a little bit, right? He didn't get a lot of carries last year at Minnesota. So he should be ready to go, and I believe this is his last year too. So it's kind of his money making year if he wants to make it into the NFL next season. So I assume that he's going to get a boatload of carries this season. Again, kind of similar to Hardy, not a lot of depth
Yeah.
or proven depth in that Ohio backfield right now. So I would assume the carries are really going to be split between he and Parker Navarro. And I think the one concern though was that if you remember back in the spring, like I think during the spring game, Bangura was seen on crutches and everybody was kind of like freaking out on Twitter or what have you. But that was squashed by the beat writer, basically saying that was out of precaution. So he should be ready full go for the regular season.
Yeah, and one more. We were familiar with Wayshawn Parker at Washington State last year. He goes over to Utah. Presumed running back one there. Going to have a new quarterback, Devin Dampier. Devin Dampier is going to be a lot more mobile at the quarterback position for Utah. But it's been a while, I think, since Kyle Whittingham has had a 200 carry back now. But Wayshawn Parker has potential to do that. Not sure he's going to get there this year, particularly with a quarter like Dampier. But you have to like him if he opens up at running back one for Utah, who we know is going to be a challenger in the Big 12. There's not a lot of, I think, proven pieces in that offense. And other than Dampier and Parker, those two may be the guys under the spotlight when we're talking about proven talent. They both end up there at a new place. I've got Parker, I think, right outside the top 25. But I really like him based on his potential this year in that offense. Again, not sure he's a going to be a 200 carry back, but you mentioned earlier with one of the players we were mentioning, maybe a safe floor with Parker if he nails down that running back one spot, right?
Yeah, I mean, three straight 1,000-yard rushers for the RB1 under the offensive coordinator, Jason Beck. So you like that for Wayshawn Parker. I think the second thing is that this is arguably one of the best offensive lines in the country, at least on the outside, right? Their tackles are legitimate first round NFL draft candidates. So I mean, you obviously like that for any kind of running back, running behind an experienced offensive line. And we talked about it, I think last week with Dampier. There's not a lot for him to throw to, so you kind
Yeah.
of expect that the Utes are going to lean into the run game this season. So yeah, I found Wayshawn a little bit difficult to rank properly, but I think I agree with you a higher floor than some others in that range.
Yep. Now, as we transition to some of the other, I think we go into more like, do we call it position battles? I don't know if we can call it position battles, Mike,
What
because
else would we call it?
teams are starting to go to that two-back system and committee now, right? Like we saw it last year at Ohio State with Henderson and Judkins, and it was interesting. I saw an interview with James Peoples on James Peoples this like a week or two ago, and he was talking about how those two guys last year basically kept one another fresh for the championship run. And of course, we'll probably, matter of fact, let's just kind of start there. I was going to start up high on the list where Ohio State, they go get CJ Donaldson. You've got Peoples there too. I'm expecting much of the same as last year, even though we're looking at a new coordinator situation. But I'm wondering if that's the formula that Ohio State uses, barring injury, if it's just sort of a mixed bag. Peoples, Donaldson, 10 to 15 carries every week for each of those guys, mixing it up, maybe depending on who's got the hot hand. I'm higher on Peoples than I am Donaldson. I feel like if there's one of the two that I feel is going to kind of break away from the other, I'm going to lean with Peoples on the talent side on that one. Where are you?
I agree, but I think the disparity of where these guys are getting drafted is a little much. You're seeing Peoples kind of go in that seven on the high end to maybe the ninth, 10th round, where CJ Donaldson's falling beyond round 20. And I really disagree with that per se, because I do feel like it's going to be similar to last year, where you're going to get, 50, 50, 45, 55, 45 split. So I think CJ Donaldson is actually a value at this point if you're getting him beyond round 20, because, who's going to be that goal line option, right? The Peoples will be in there plenty, but it's not like you're getting rushing touchdowns from Julian Sayin, right? He's a really small quarterback for Ohio State standards. And like, I think, but if they're getting 20, 25 rushing touchdowns, if not more, like those are really just going to go to Peoples and Donaldson, in my opinion. So he's become a value at this point. I think a bigger topic, and maybe you can discuss this, is you said the split with the Ohio State running backs last year. Do we see that at Penn State? I guess we did see it at Penn State, but like, do we see that occurring with Penn State? Maybe Texas, for example, Notre Dame, right? With Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love, you're seeing these teams that are expecting to be in the playoff, maybe playing 14, 15, 16 games. Like they're going to want to limit their running backs and the amount of touches that they're getting.
It's a great point you bring up because Penn State was one of the places I was going to go with Singleton and Allen, right? I mean, I've got both of those players ranked in the top 50. Penn State's supposed to be really good, one of the top players this year in the national title contention conversation. And they were good enough last year where both players were viable fantasy options, right? I see that again. We lean on Singleton. I think the lean on Singleton for me is just Katron Allen is just steady and consistent, and Nick Singleton to me has a little bit more of that playmaking ability, and I think could go off in more games than not. But we can just kind of I think you just said it. I mean, Penn State's looking to probably make a deep run in the playoffs, at least expected to be in the college football playoffs. They're going to need these guys for 13, 14 plus games. It's interesting we say that, and I still got Nick Singleton inside my top 15, Katron Allen at around 45. But I agree with the point that you just made. That's what we talk about it every year, and I'll bring it up right here, Mike. This is one of those situations where a lot of these places that have two legitimate backs, keep your eye on these situations during preseason camp. This is something where maybe one guy gets hurt, has to sit out for 4 or 5 months of the season, and all of a sudden, if that were to happen to either one of those guys, the other Penn State running back all of a sudden becomes probably a top 10 running back for the first month and a half of the season.
Yeah, it's tough to bank on that
You
type of
can't,
stuff that you
but you
can't,
never
but
know.
you never know. You never know. So, yeah, it's not a bad, like it's we've done this strategy. We've seen
Yep.
this strategy. Never bad to handcuff those backfields, because those, yeah, both guys are really good in their own right, right?
Yep. What about Texas though, right? Because this was something that we were talking about a lot during the spring, and that it just felt like the wave of momentum was leaning to Wisner. I'm super high on him. I'm almost to the point now, and you know how I feel, and I'll just say it here because you and I talk more off the camera than on. And that is, I have this thing with players that just have a history of getting banged up. I just feel like for some reason they can never avoid the injury bug. And I feel like CJ Baxter is closer down that path right now. And if Wisner actually, separates himself, you just wonder. Look, Texas has some talented backs, and Baxter came in highly recruited as well, highly touted, super talented. Um, you just wonder if that's not going to be a split backfield. Could this be a situation where maybe Baxter bounces out of there? I don't know, but I'm super high on Wisner. I love what he did last year between his running ability, catching the ball out of the backfield. We know Sarkisian loves three down backs four down backs maybe. And they even have Gibson in there. So there's no shortage of mouths to feed in that Texas backfield. But to me, Wisner feels like the difference maker of those three.
Yeah, there's room for improvement too because he only averaged 4.7 yards per carry last season, right? He was ended up being a with 1,000 yard back in 15 games. But he only again 4.7 yards per carry, only five rushing touchdowns. So I think those numbers can improve, and we obviously both believe that Texas is going to be very good this year offensively. So I just think the amount of opportunities with or without CJ Baxter, I think the number of scoring opportunities is going to be high for Trey Wisner. What I love about Wisner and why I have him as RB8, I believe, is the opportunity in the passing game, right? He was in a split backfield last season and he had
Yep.
61 targets in 15 games. Like that is a high number for that's a high number for a solidified workhorse
Yep.
running back, right? Not let alone a guy that was in a split backfield like he was with Jadon Blue. So in PPR leagues, I think Wisner's going to be gold. And there's the recent report that CJ Baxter is cleared, healthy, whatever. But I mean, how much do you trust those
Right.
reports? Could that be coach speak? And Texas is a team with championship aspirations. Are they really going to rush CJ Baxter back in those, the first month, first 2 months, or what have you? So Weiser could be really good to start off the season.
Yeah, and to that point, if Wisner gets 150 plus carries, you add another 30 to 35 reception on there. All of a sudden, you're looking at over 180 touches in a 12 game span, and you're probably getting 8 to 10 minimum yards per catch average out of those receptions, right? So to your point, like particularly those receptions are going to make up for a it's gonna account for a lot.
Yeah, and you got to imagine that his rushing touchdowns are going to increase,
Yep.
right, as well.
Absolutely. Let's go over to Boise State, Mike. Ashton Genty gone. No shortage of options for Boise State in the backfield. Sire Gaines, probably most likely, who we assume is going to be RB1. He missed a lot of last season with an injury. So again, we're kind of, we I talked about it. I'm not really big on the guys that are can't avoid the injury bug, although it was just, one season for him, but he's still my top back in that Boise State offense. They went out and got Malik Sherrod over from Fresno State. You still have Dylan Riley. You still have Dubar there as well. Like there's four decent options in that Boise State backfield. The question is Gaines going to be, will Gaines be good enough to separate himself from those four that he gets the majority of the carries? That's where I am with him. I'm willing to bank and gamble on it because of the potential of that Boise State offense and what it can do. So I have Gaines just inside of my top 20. But again, it does come with some slight risk. This is where you and I value when you're looking at rankings. It makes a difference on whether you're selecting him in a redraft or whether you're selecting him in a best ball because there's a little bit more of a risk with him in a best ball, whereas in a redraft, a little less risk because you can move off at any point. What's your thoughts on the Boise State backfield?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The style of league that you're playing in probably dictates where or if you're taking Sire Gaines. The thing with Sire Gaines is that I kind of compare him to the conversation we just had with the Texas backfield. Like there is coach quotes that he's supposed to be ready for June, but is Gaines going to be one of those guys that's just kind of plagued by the injury bug? A la a CJ Baxter perhaps, right? So we're definitely going to be tuning into those late July, early August Boise State reports. I think it just behooves you to handcuff that entire backfield. We know what Boise State's going to do and run the football, right?
Yep.
And who's to say that backfield doesn't end up how it did a couple of years ago, where you had multiple 800-yard rushers, right? I believe it was Genty and George Halani. I believe
Yeah.
so. So I think stacking that backfield, if you can, with Malik Sherrod, the Fresno State transfer, is probably the best way to go about it. But yeah, I think if he's healthy, Sire Gaines probably ends up as the running back
The
one
thing
long
that
term
really,
here.
and it's funny because you were talking about handcuffing, and I was like, damn, I can't go three handcuffs. Like like once when you're going three deep on a handcuff, you probably should just stay away, right? So that's the thing with best ball type stuff because you could waste three roster spots for one. But I just think to myself, I think Dylan Riley's a pretty decent back too, and why would they bring in Malik Sherrod? And so it's like you're to your point, it feels like they have three very decent options in that backfield. And I'm just really curious to see how the carries get distributed. And who knows? We saw this in an example last year, Western Michigan. They had three backs to get 100 carries last year, right? So you never know.
Yep.
Couple of schools that I want to talk about, Mike. We're super high on Isaac Brown, but you've also got Duke Watson there as well. I really love Isaac Brown. But Watson's talented too. And every time I look at my rankings, I'm wondering, do I have too much separation between these two? Could it be more of like that Penn State situation? And do I have Watson a little bit farther down than what I like? And do I have Brown maybe a little too high? But I just feel like Brown's ceiling in this offense. You've got Miller Moss there. I don't think Moss is going to move much. He's going to move around much. I happen to think Louisville's run game is going to be very good this year. And that's really, I think, different from us to say over the last couple of years. But if I'm investing right now in Louisville, I feel better right now with Isaac Brown and Duke Watson than I maybe do with Colin Lacey and Chris Bell. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's exactly how I see this Louisville offense playing out, is how it did 2 years ago. Remember when they had Jawar Jordan and Isaac Rendo in the backfield? Like,
Yep.
that's how I see the Louisville offense playing out this year. Do you ever have a guy that you rank in the top 10 or so, but over the course of the offseason, you just never draft, even though you have him in the top 10? And that's just kind of where I'm at with Isaac Brown. Um, I just think Duke Watson is a comparable talent, and spending first round draft capital on a guy that could potentially be in a two-way split or a three-way split with Kewan Brown. Um, I don't know, something. I still have Isaac Brown in the top 10, but something is making me very cautious about that. If you listen to the summer school podcast about Louisville, they were talking up Kewan Brown, the perceived third string running back at this moment. I believe one of the coaches, I believe, said that he was the best running back in that backfield in spring camp. Now, this is a guy that already entered the transfer portal during the offseason, so maybe those quotes were literally just to keep him, in house
Yeah.
for this upcoming season. But you take note of that, right? That they're talking
Yeah.
up the RB3, and it just there's a lot of mouths to feed, and it's not like this is just a nominal RB2 here in Duke Watson. Like, like I said, he's comparable. He had a higher yards per carry average than Isaac Brown last season, so he is a legitimate talent. I just think you look at what they did in 2023 with Garendo and Jawar Jordan. I think you're going to see it play out the similar way this year.
Yeah, another school sticking in the ACC that I'll jump to real quick is Miami. And we don't have, at least I don't have either of those two backs, Fletcher or Lyle, too high at all. I don't have them high at all. But the more I look at them and the more I read, the more I see, the more I hear, I'm starting to feel Lyle now over Fletcher, and I have them close in the spring, right? It's one of those situations where I have them ranked so close. It's personal preference when you get to that point. I have a feeling that could be one too, where maybe we see some split as well, right? I mean, Miami's coming off of a really great year, but man, there's a lot of unknowns at Miami right now. You've got um, Carson Beck coming over, right, at quarterback.
Yeah,
Is
some
he
of the
fully
the
healthy?
yep.
Unproven wide receivers. They bring in CJ Daniels, who was third best option at LSU last year. Kind of feels like maybe the formula might be for Miami to kind of pound it a little bit. But where are you at on Lyle and Fletcher? Because I'm starting to like Jordan Lyle a little bit more as the spring or as the summer wears on.
I think it's comparable to Ohio State with Peoples and CJ Donaldson in that people are just gonna kind of gravitate towards the higher upside, the less
Yep.
proven guy in Jordan Lyle, thinking that he can kind of break away from the pack over Mark Fletcher. I haven't really been drafting either player. It's not, you don't have to spend a lot to go get them. They're probably going in the anywhere, what, 14th
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
16th, 17th round. Um, I can see it being an even split. And you look back at Shannon Dawson, the offensive coordinator, you look back over the last 5 years between last season at Miami and then prior to that at Houston, and he really split up the carries with the running backs. I think the RB1 averaged maybe 600 yards per season prior to Damian Martinez last year. So the RB1 really hasn't been valuable under this offensive coordinator in previous stops. So I don't see a ton of upside if both remain healthy in that backfield. I do think that Miami, like you said, is going to lean on the run a little bit more this year.
Three more schools I think it's important for us to touch on. Let's start at Texas Tech because I mean they're transitioning from a workhorse in Taj Brooks, right? I mean you've got Quentin Joyner, who I think right now we're very high on this year, but you've also got Jacoby Williams there as well, who can kind of eat into those carries. I like Quentin Joyner. But let's be honest, I don't think either one of these guys is a Taj Brooks, and I can see where the Texas Tech run game could be a little bit more split this year than we've seen in the last few years. With that being said, I'm still higher on Joyner, I'm sorry,
Joyner.
over
Yep.
Williams. Where are you at on the Texas Tech situation?
Yeah, I'm at Joyner. He kind of fits in that bucket I was just talking about of like guys that I have ranked fairly high that I'm just not willing to spend up to go get. Could end up being a mistake. This new offensive coordinator, Mac Leftwich, obviously he leaned on his running backs the last 3 years as a play caller. Back at Incarnate Word, and then the last 2 years with Texas State. So the RB1 in this system is typically valuable.
Yes.
I cannot get out of my head that bowl game where I saw Jacoby Williams rush for like 100 and
Yes.
what did he do? 150 yards against Arkansas or something like that. I just quick story. I remember sitting at the computer during that day and FanDuel put out once Taj Brooks was announced out for that bowl game, they put up a line for Jacoby Williams of like 90 rushing yards. I'm like, there's no way he's gonna get this, right? He barely got any carries during the regular season and he went for 100 in like the first freaking quarter. So that was money down the drain. But I can't get that out of my head. He's on the smaller side, but he's got legitimate bursts, and I really feel like he can make a name for himself in that backfield, even though we believe that Joyner is going to be the RB1.
Yeah, let's go over to Arizona State. I think that's a good one to touch on. Cam Scatterbo no longer there. Kyson Brown is there. Kanye Udo, the transfer from Army, is there. You and I, in the beginning of spring, were kind of going a little bit, looking at both sides of this. I've landed with the fact that I really like what Sam Levitt had to say about Kyson Brown. They do need a versatile running back in that offense because they need a running back that could catch the ball. Now, the argument on the side of Udo is that he came from a run heavy offense, so he hasn't really shown whether or not he can catch the ball. But to me, I still feel that that's why I lean on Kyson Brown because he's shown that he can do it in that system, which that system was pretty good last year for Scatterboo. Now, neither one of those guys are a Camp Scatterboo, but I'm leaning on the side of Kyson Brown right now. I really like Arizona State. I think Sam Levitt takes his game to the next level. This, to me, feels like one of those running back spots where, man, if Brown is the guy and you happen to land on him, he could do some really good things and maybe exceed where I have him ranked currently. Where are you at with Arizona State?
I haven't been drafting too much of the Arizona State running backs personally. What makes it difficult is that you have an offensive head coach in Kenny Dillingham that in his previous stops with Memphis, with Florida State, prior to arriving at Arizona State, he really liked to spread around the carries between multiple backs, right? And then you bring in an
But
offensive court. Go
yeah,
ahead. You bring in
but
an offensive
yeah,
coordinator in Marcus Arroyo, and he's just the complete opposite, right?
yes.
There is not an offensive coordinator in the country currently that leans on his RB1 more than Marcus Arroyo.
That's right.
So you got to toggle between those two ideologies, right? How is it going to be? Is it going to be Dillingham's ways of splitting it up? Or is it going to be Arroyo and he's going to lean on one guy? So I personally, I lean more towards Dillingham this season. I think there was mention of a possible committee. I think because they have differing skill sets too, right? Udo comes from
Yeah.
that run heavy offense in Army. Raleek Brown, I believe, is like the smaller pass catching guy, and then you have Kyson Brown, who we pegged as RB1 because I think he has
Yep.
the best skill set to fit in this system. So it could end up being Kyson Brown, and like you said, he could more than succeed or overachieve his value at this point. I just personally, I kind of lean towards maybe a committee approach this season.
Now, talk about offensive coordinators and their approach to leaning on players. Tim Cramsey over at Memphis. You and I have had tons of conversations on the Memphis backfield, and it's not that we're really like, well, it is a little bit that we're unsure, but the hard part is that this has been historically a very productive position under Cramsey, and I like the flexibility of Greg Desrosiers, but you know what? Sutton Smith, I believe, will be a factor in that backfield. I'm curious if we get a little bit more committee this year out of them two than we've had out of years past. But the reason why I have Desrosiers ranked as high as I do is because the upside in that offense, what we've seen historically, man, you hate to see a guy, if that is the guy that we're pegging running back one, you can't leave that guy on the board for more than 3 rounds.
Yeah, Cramsey in the last 4 years has had three top six running backs in college fantasy football. So typically this is the most profitable offense per se when it comes to fantasy football for RB1. So you definitely want to lock down who that RB1 is. We're both of the same mindset that it's going to be DeRozier's as of now, right? Because I think he fits in terms of his pass catching ability and staying on the field with something that Sutton Smith has not been able to do over the course of his career. I just, I'm with you kind of. I think that we don't discount a running back by committee approach this year because of the differing skill sets with Sutton Smith and DeRozier's. And there's a third guy too, Makari Bodiford, who maybe could function as that Brandon Thomas, like red zone guy that just gets, they bring him in with inside the 5 yard line and it just leaves everybody tilting, right?
Yeah.
They just like last year with Mario Anderson and that who's this guy running in for a 1 yard touchdown is Brandon Thomas. So I think we both lean to Rozier's, but I'm also not putting it past that we could see a
If
split
that
this year.
happens, I'll be pissed off because we just had our best ball draft, and I was so afraid of losing Sutton on the handcuff that I went Desrosiers and Sutton 7 and 13. Those are the rounds that I took both of them in. Uh,
I we I'm kind at this point in the off season, like screw the ADP value. Like I did the same with UL Monroe, right? With Deshaun Ford and Zach Palmer Smith. I'm like, yeah, Deshaun Ford's kind of going in that 25 round
yep.
range. Screw it. I'm just gonna lock down this backfield and I'll find some other value later on.
Yeah,
So
I
I don't.
agree.
It's not a terrible strategy at this point in the off season. Just go get the backfield if you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, let's go one more before we start moving into some of our sleepers or players we want to or we're shying away from. Wisconsin's worth a conversation. Dylan Jones, Darian Dupree. Um, where are you at right now on the Wisconsin? Well, I know where we're at, but why are we on Jones right now in that Wisconsin backfield?
Yeah, so we were initially on Dupree, and then he got injured halfway through the
Yeah.
spring. And it was one of those things where, like, it wasn't just Dylan Jones's next man up, and he's just, running with the ones now. Like, he legitimately stole that RB1 job while Dupree was out.
Yep.
And you've got multiple Wisconsin outlets saying he's going to be the RB1 this year. He was like arguably the most impressive offensive player during the spring, and he's arguably one of the top five most important Wisconsin players on the team heading into 2025. So it was just him absolutely snagging that RB1 job during the spring. And we're in an offense now under the new offensive coordinator, who, of course, his name is escaping me at this point. But they tend to lean on the RB1 more than the previous regime. So, yeah, we are definitely on Dylan Jones right
Well,
now.
here's the thing, and this is why I think it's important to bring this up.
Jeff Grimes is the new offensive
There you
coordinator.
go.
Sorry
Yeah,
about
that's
that.
right, Jeff Grimes. That's correct. And Grimes even has a history of where he'll utilize a couple of guys too. I mean, he I think he's got a little history of utilizing two backs at times when he had it. I think he did that at Kansas, if I'm
He's
correct.
done both. I'm looking at his history now. So, like, he had Devin Neal last season, who obviously had 250
Yeah.
carries, but then back at Baylor, like, he really split it up. So, he's done both over the course of his
And
career.
what we still face right now is just sort of the Wisconsin RB1, right? We've been doing this for a long time. It was just interesting. We just did something with a friend of the site, John Lobb, where he's looking and was comparing greatest historic seasons, wants to do a Hall of Fame thing for college fantasy
Oop, keep
football.
that under wraps. Keep that under wraps.
Oh, okay. But anyway,
Yeah.
um, when you
Just
pull
his,
up
yeah.
historical numbers, Wisconsin running backs and the years that they've had have just been historic and at times like unmatched in certain seasons, right? And so I just wonder how much of that do we and other college fantasy football enthusiasts that have been playing for a while do are we overvaluing the Wisconsin running back position right now because of that? Now I say that and I don't have Dylan Jones ranked in my top 30, so he's outside of my top 30. But a lot of it does is because one, we do still have Dupree still in the conversation. Jones still has some work to do in preseason camp, even though the consensus is coming out of spring, the wave of momentum is with him.
Yeah. And I would just say that we're not drafting Dylan Jones as, Monty Ball, right?
Yes.
He's still going in the seventh, eighth round. So, we're not drafting him like Monty Ball or Ron Dane, whoever. So, there's still a little bit of caution baked into that of where he's being drafted.
All right, Mike. So let's move it a little bit now that we're getting a little long in the tooth here. We like to throw out a few sleepers, few players that we want to be that we're a little skeptical of. You mentioned it too. Like, is there that one player in the top 10 that I always seem to avoid? You threw out Isaac Brown. Um, I'll start with one of my players, and it's interesting. We just had a best ball draft, but I feel that way about Sire Gaines. I feel his potential in the Boise State offense is really sky high, knowing what Boise State can do, knowing the schedule and the team, most of the teams that Boise State is playing. If they land on Gaines as a RB1 and he gets, I don't know, 50% of the attempts or even 40% of the 40%. That's going to be enough for him to be a really good top 20 fantasy back. But man, it does make me nervous because there are so many mouths to feed. He is the guy, the first guy that I look at in my top 20 where, man, I really like him. I love the offense. I love the potential, love the schedule, love the whole 9 yards. But man, there could be three other guys that could eat into those carries.
Yeah.
What's
No,
a
I
name for
agree.
you?
That what name that we like or that we're
Name that
skeptical
we're
of?
low that we're very cautious about. Maybe, a little nervous to draft based on where we have them ranked on what we know.
Well, there's a lot of them. I think
Yeah, I know. I know.
there's a lot of question marks with this running back class. Um, I've talked about Anthony Hankerson, and I've got him lower than consensus at RB13. There's turnover along the offensive line. They're bringing in back just one starter. And then you just look at his game logs last season, like how many games, I don't have it up right now, but how many games did he average less than like 4.5 yards per carry? Like, he's not this explosive running back that is just, he only needs 10 carries a game to get you 100 and some yards, right? He is so volume dependent
Yeah.
that I'm very cautious about that. And you saw in his game logs, like, he's just the second half of last season, he was just not as effective
Well, he
as the team's
split the
bell
first
cow.
few games with Jam Griffin when
And
Jam
he was
Griffin.
better when that happened, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just cautious that he's actually just not that talented of a player and that he's very volume dependent. And I heard this a lot over the offseason of like, oh, the Oregon State system, the Oregon State system. Like we've only seen that 1 year, right? This
Yep.
is 1 year that this offensive coordinator has been calling plays. So we don't necessarily know exactly his preferences, his tendencies, what have you. So that's a player that I haven't drafted, right? I'm not willing to spend a first round draft pick on him.
Yeah, I'll bring another name that I bring up too. I seem to be overlooking him because here's where I'm at. I'm down here in Louisiana. I think LSU is going to be a lot better. I think they possibly could be a college football playoff contender. It seems like people either love Garrett Nussmeier in the passing game or they love Caden Durham this year. And I can't go up to get either one of those players with where they're being drafted unless you and I talked about a little bit today. Nussmeier in 6 point TD leagues, I think, is way higher on the list than he's in a 4 point passing TD league. But it seems like people either love the passing game at LSU more than I do, or they love the running game more than I do. And it doesn't. I did land Hilton in our best ball draft, but as far as Nussmeier or Durham go, it just doesn't seem like I'm willing to take them wherever they're going right now.
Yeah, the LSU running game was so putrid last year that it makes you cautious about Caden Durham and how improved the LSU running game will be in 2025. I think Caden Durham ends up being like a talent versus actual fantasy, relevancy or whatever. Like everybody agrees that he is an uber talented running back. It's just, the question marks with the LSU offensive line and losing, however many NFL draft picks. Plus, is he going to be splitting carries possibly with Harlem Berry? I think that kind of plays into it. Why he's being drafted higher than maybe he probably should be.
Yeah. One more from yourself. What about another player you look at with a little, just not pulling the trigger on this guy with where he's going?
Dylan Carson for me. He's going in the third round in a lot of drafts now, and like you can't discount what he did in the final month of last season,
Yeah,
right? He
three of the
was
last
getting
four, he went over 100. Yeah.
it, and when he's healthy, he's getting those 24, 25 carries per game. But like that's not necessary. He needs 300 carries like Brad Roberts did to get into like become a third round fantasy running back because he's not going to be involved in the passing game at
Zero.
all. Zero.
Zero.
He's going to get one target max during the regular season. So he needs to get 20 to 25 carries every single week and he needs to find the end zone every single week to reach or get that value that where he's being drafted. So it's just not somebody. I'm not disputing really good player. Like I would draft him if he's going in rounds 5 to 6, but I'm just not going up to round 3 to go get him.
Yeah, no, not there for me either. Let's talk about a few players that we do like. That way we're more on the more optimistic side of this. And one name that I started, I think I have him in my sleepers in the preseason fantasy draft guide, and that's just Gideon Davidson. And I know he's kind of getting some smoke here. He's getting he's getting some attention as we near the season. I just feel like, Adam Randall is going to be he's going to kind of be, hey, this guy's been with the program here. He's going to get his shot, but I just feel like the talent level, particularly what people were commenting on and reporting from the spring, I just feel like it's only a matter of time before Gideon Davidson wins that job full time. Could it be halfway through the season? I don't know. That's where you have to weigh out your options. Is it worth drafting him with where he's going? He feels more like a draft and stash in redraft leagues as opposed to best ball. But he's a guy that I really like. I think has potential to kind of have a breakout year in that Clemson backfield this year.
Yeah, if you're in a draft with Josh Chevalier, you're gonna he is going to be drafting him in like rounds 10 to 12 now at this point, which probably too steep for me. But yeah, after that summer school, I sent you the notes there, like basically said, yeah, it's probably gonna be a committee to start out for Clemson until he Gideon Davidson's like
Yeah.
ready to go, and then he'll just take off, right? Um, I think a couple guys for me in terms of sleepers. I do like OJ Arnold for Georgia Southern. It was notable to me, and I noted this in the guide, that Georgia Southern, in this era of the transfer portal, Georgia Southern didn't bring in any transfer running backs, right? And we've seen in the past when Jalen White was injured,
Yep.
the previous starter last few years, like OJ Arnold is very serviceable in relief there. So I think he's just a shoe-in to get that RB1 job. Probably not a lot of high upside, and we have him ranked accordingly. But if you get me 808 touchdowns, and you're drafting him in rounds, 17 to 20, like that feels really
Yeah.
good. So I like him a lot. Nolan Ray, I think for Maryland, like how high did we see Roman Hemi get drafted last year? Close to round 10 or so. And Nolan Ray is simply just a better player than Roman Hemby was. So I really like him, and I think he's going to get the boatload of carries there for Maryland.
Yeah, and one player I'll throw out there. I really like a lot this year if he gets the workload. It's Jalen Buckley at Western Michigan. I mentioned it earlier. They had three backs that had 100 rush attempts last year. So we thought, it was like when you think back, you're thinking, well, it was like a 55-45 split last year, but two of those three guys are gone. They did bring in Cole Cabana, but what has he done? And I feel like, there's potential there where Jalen Buckley could possibly eclipse the 200 carry mark in that Western Michigan offense. I really like him this year because I don't know who else Western Michigan really has right now.
No, I remember filling out their depth chart. Like we have a 2D depth chart on the in the guide and such, and I don't know that I could really fill out their whole running back rotation because they had like three scholarship running backs on the entire roster. So yeah, I kind of like that. Like as a Michigan guy, like what's Cole Cabana done at this point in
Right.
his career? Nothing. He's been injured. He didn't even make an impact with when he was at Michigan. So yeah, I like that.
And one I seem to be getting a little bit more on the train a little bit more as we come out of spring, get into the middle of summer. There's a lot of people that think Florida can be pretty good this year. I just think Florida's schedule is really tough, but people think DJ Lagway is the real deal. DJ Lagway to me is not a fantasy quarterback. He's just a good quarterback, right? But if Florida is going to be good, if they're going to be as good as some expect, then the running game's going to have to be really good. And Jaden Baugh is a running back that I really like. Now, under Napier, I mean, look, Napier has a history of riding multiple players. You got Jacoby Jackson there as well. So you got another back where they're probably most likely going to split carries. But there's a part of me feels that if Florida's going to be that good, I think a player like Jaden Baugh possibly could have a little bit more value than I think where he might be getting drafted right now.
I'm looking at our I love when we talk about players and then like an idea comes into my head that I probably should have been doing already. Did Jacoby Jackson go in our best ball?
Yeah, he
No.
went he went somewhere, but I'm only looking at the first 19 rounds right now, but I
Yeah.
know that he went somewhere.
He did not get drafted in our 30 round best ball.
He did not.
Mm-mm.
We
So
see
I
that.
like Jaden Baugh too, but like that's a pretty good if you can get Jacoby Jackson who ran for what 200 yards in the spring game, like that's pretty good value.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
What any of the players on your end that you're looking at where it's like, okay, I'm starting to see a little bit more value here based on based on what we've done, what I've done in a few drafts, or trending, any players trending more in a positive direction for you?
I mean, Miles Montgomery for UCF.
Okay.
I think, people were kind of focused on Jaden Nixon at the start just because of the success he had at Western Michigan last year. But I think he's going to be the RB1 for UCF this year. He's going pretty late in draft, so he's a pretty good value. I've talked about this guy on other shows, Chavon Wright for Northern Illinois, and I mentioned this backfield to you extensively when when that
Yeah.
transfer happened. I love Telly Johnson, and I do think he's going to be a really good player moving forward. But so the connection is they bring in Trayvon Wright in the offseason post spring. His coordinator at his previous location at the Division II level is now the offensive coordinator at Northern Illinois. So there is the connection between coordinator or play caller and running back. And what do you do the last 3 years? Rush for 5,000 yards at Charleston,
I was
right?
getting ready to pull up his stats from last year. They were
5,000
absolutely
yards.
sick.
The 5,000 yards the last 3 years, but yeah, what did he rush for, like 30 something touchdowns last
It
year?
was yeah. I don't have his stats in front of me. I was going to look him up as you were talking about him, but his stats were just so sick,
Outrageous.
man. And
Outrageous.
and to your point, Telly, before that happened, before Wright, there were thoughts that Telly Johnson, we had him set comfortably in the top 20 as far as running backs until that happened. And then you kind of have to shy away a little bit because, like you mentioned, you had a guy that probably, that he's just really talented, and NIU's going to lean on that run game, and you just know that Wright's going to get his fair share of touches. He seems legitimate.
Yeah, if you're in a redraft, like best ball, I think you could just choose one or the other. I
Yep.
still have been, stacking the two. But if you're in a redraft, you absolutely have to stack Chavon Wright and Telly Johnson when you're drafting that NIU backfield. It's imperative.
Yeah, and I look, just sticking in the MAC one more, and this is something, again talk about history of players getting injured. But you've got Chip Trayanum who's stepping down over at Toledo, stepping down from competition level, right, going from Kentucky to Toledo, and if he can stay healthy, seems to be the clear cut running back one. There's some good value right there. Again, you're battling the injury bug with him, but if he stays healthy, tremendous upside there. And I think 1, 2, and I swung at the fence with this one in round 30 of our best ball draft because I took Ethan Vasco, the quarterback for Liberty, because I talked about on the quarterback show how I love the schedule. It was the reason why I liked Caden Salto last year. I like Vasco this year. And I took a shot with Caden Williams, who we feel could be right now is the projected starting B back, which that's where the value has been in that offense. And so, deep in drafts, I feel like a guy like Caden Williams right now is nice value considering what. And now I'm forgetting the B back that was there last year. That was solid last year. Seemed like he was running for 100 yards.
Quentin
Uh,
Cooley.
Quentin Cooley. That's correct. And really at that point, that's tremendous consistency if you can get a guy that's going to regularly run for 100 yards. Now, who's to say he's going to get that workload? Maybe not, but the potential's there at the starting B back spot in that offense if he lands it.
Yeah, that's most people are on Julian Gray, and I get it in terms of he got a lot of pub during the spring, but like as you mentioned, he plays A back,
Yes.
and the profitable position in that offense under Jamie Chadwell has been the B back, the big, the quote unquote bigger back, a la Quentin
Yeah.
Cooley, and Julian Gray, a former wide receiver. I get it in terms of like he got a lot of hype and he does have the the dual position designation on Fantrax, so you can probably, if he does end up leading the team in rushing, he's got RB and wide receiver designation, but you look a couple of years ago, Liberty did the same thing with Aaron Bedgood. Very similar player, right? Former wide
Yep.
receiver turned running back. He averaged 9.2 fantasy points per game. And
Yeah,
now
and they were
people are,
talking about him in the spring because he was a do it all. I remember that. But like I said, look, once when you're late in your draft, maybe even redrafts where you know you're going to free up a roster spot, it would not hurt to just go Caden Williams, Evan Dickens in the last
yep.
couple of rounds, and there's a good chance you might secure a 20 carry back in that Liberty offense.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think Julian Gray is terrible value at this point.
Any other players you want to throw out here before we kind of cut some things and pull the curtains down, man?
It's
Anything we
Friday.
missed?
It's Friday. I'm ready to make a drink.
Let's do it, man. Look, let's wrap it up right here. So this is going to be the second show that we've done. We've done the quarterbacks. This is the running backs, the second part of our three-part preseason preview series. We're going to do the receivers and tight ends next. But as Mike just said, we're going to call it a week. We'll see you guys on the next show when we're talking receivers and tight ends. So for Mike Bainbridge, I'm Joe DeSalvo. See you guys next time.